Hi guys, okay, so today we're gonna do Cambridge Assessment International Education, English, Stage 6, Paper 1, Non-Fiction 2023. So this is actually Cambridge Primary Progression Test. Okay, so you have 1 hour and the additional materials here include insert. The first section is section A, reading. So you have 30 minutes to complete this section. Okay, so for the first question is, look at the first paragraph from line 5 to 9. Okay, so 1A, give one example of a passive verb form. Okay, so first and foremost, you have to differentiate between what is active and what is passive voice. Okay, so this is an example of active voice. Okay, so chef here is referring to subject. Cook here is active verb because it is active voice. Okay, so the next example is passive voice. Okay, so passive voice, meal now becomes the subject and was cooked is now the passive verb. Okay, so what's the difference between these two sentences is the first example, the subject is actually doing the action, whereas example number 2, the subject is receiving the action. Okay, so let us take a look of paragraph 1. Okay, so since they mentioned that it is from line 5 to 9, so this is line 5 and line 9 is here. So the only passive verb that can be found here is actually was built. So the next question, how long did it take to build the Titanic? So it took 3 years because of this sentence. After 3 years in construction, the ship was ready for the ocean by the end of March 1912. So it took 3 years. So the next question is, what does the writer compare the size of the Titanic to? Okay, so let us take a look. Okay, so you can get the answer from this sentence here. She was the biggest too, measuring 28 meters wide, 53 meters tall, and 269 meters long. That's about the length of 3 football fields. The question here is, what does the writer compare the size of the Titanic to? So here is a comparison question. So you have to mention that 3 football fields. The second question, look at the second paragraph. Give one phrase that means first trip. Okay, so now we are on our second paragraph and the meaning of first trip is maiden voyage. What does maiden voyage here actually mean is, it is the very first journey made by a ship, aircraft or vehicle after it is newly built. So it can sometimes be used figuratively, like for someone's first attempt at something new. Like for example, it was her first maiden voyage into public speaking. So what does that actually mean is, it is her first time giving a speech. So the next question here is, which group of passengers on the Titanic would have bought one-way tickets? Okay, so what do you mean by one-way tickets is, for example, you are from Kuala Lumpur, okay, and you are going to Australia. So if you buy one-way ticket, it means that you are buying flight ticket from Kuala Lumpur to Australia, and you didn't buy flight ticket from Australia back to Kuala Lumpur. So it's only one-way ticket. If you buy two-way tickets to and fro, we call it return tickets. Okay, so here, since they mentioned that you have to refer to the second paragraph, and here you can see that this included holiday makers, businessmen, and people who wanted to start a new life in the US. So the best answer would definitely be people who wanted to start a new life in the US, because they do not know when will they actually return back to their own country. So question number 3, how does the writer link the ideas between the first and second paragraphs? So link here, it means connect. Okay, so the writer used the year 1912 at the end of the first paragraph and also repeated it at the start of the first paragraph here. So here the writer is trying to link them according to time or chronologically. So chronologically actually means in sequence. Next question, look at the third paragraph. Give one abstract noun from the first sentence. Okay, so abstract noun here. Okay, what do we mean by that? Well, abstract noun refers to ideas, feelings, qualities, or concepts. So these are things that you cannot see, cannot touch, cannot hear, cannot taste, or cannot smell. So you can think of it this way. If you cannot point to it, or you cannot physically hold it, it is probably an abstract noun. I can give you some examples: love, happiness, friendship, honesty, freedom. So you can feel or understand them, but you cannot touch them. Okay, so here they have given you a clue. You can get it from the first sentence in the third paragraph. Okay, so the abstract noun you can get from the first sentence of the third paragraph is life, because you cannot actually physically hold on to it. What does elegant mean? Take one box. Okay, elegant actually means stylish. As you can see here, that's the answer. Okay, stylish, graceful, and classy, showing beauty in a simple and refined way. For example, I can compliment a person by saying, "Oh wow, you look very elegant in that pretty purple dress." Okay, so that's one example. The next question: give one example of a sentence with parenthetic commas. So parenthetic commas, another term would be bracketing commas, as you can see here. Okay, so what's the purpose of these parenthetic commas is to add extra information. Like for example, I can give you one example here. Okay, so for example here, my brother who lives in New Zealand is coming to visit. So this phrase here is actually extra information. So I would call this an example of a sentence with parenthetic commas. Let's see what we can actually find. This sentence here, the third class facilities at the bottom of the ship were very much more basic. So this is a very good example of a sentence with parenthetic commas. The phrase at the bottom of the ship is actually referring to the additional information to this sentence. Next question is, do you think you would like to have been a second class passenger on the Titanic? Take one box. So you can take any box, okay, providing that you provide them with two pieces of evidence from the text to support your answer. So let's say, for example, you're gonna take yes. Evidences like, for example, cabins with 2 or 4 beds, that can be one evidence. They had some storage, that can be another evidence. They had a sink, or they had a mirror. These are examples of evidences you can actually write. You don't have to write all 4, okay, you just have to mention 2. Okay, so let's say for example you want to take no instead of yes. So instead of writing they had cabins with 2 or 4 beds, you have to modify the sentence a little bit, making it a little negative, because it would be the reason why you would not like to have been on a second class passenger. Okay, so here you can write it this way: the cabins were smaller than a first class cabin. The second would be their storage facilities were limited, means not enough. So that's the reason why you would not have been a second class passenger. Okay, so the next question, look at the 4th paragraph. The writer uses language that tells us something frightening suddenly appeared. So which verb tells us this? So the verb that tells us something frightening suddenly appeared is loom. So you can write loom. Okay, give a synonym for ship. And that would be vessel, as you can see here. Okay, so the marking scheme does not accept Titanic. You have to mention vessel. So C, how do you think the captain felt when the Titanic hit the iceberg? Explain your answer, giving evidence from the text. You can try imagine yourself, you are the captain. How would you actually feel when the Titanic you're in hit the iceberg? Of course, you're gonna feel scared, you're gonna feel afraid and frightened, because you know that passengers are gonna die. Okay, so here you can actually explain by saying, I think he felt scared, terrified, horrified, afraid, because he knew that the ship was gonna sink and passengers would die. Okay, so some pieces of evidence you can get from the insert is Of course, you don't have to include everything, you just have to write one. Okay, so for example here, the captain and crew knew that the collision meant the Titanic would sink in just hours. So that's one evidence. I can give you another evidence for your information. There were only enough lifeboats to hold around half the people on board. So this sentence actually meant that there were not enough lifeboats to save everyone there. So of course, many passengers would die. Okay, so question 6, the information in the final paragraph connects back to the second paragraph. So as you can see here, the second paragraph, it talks about the Titanic's maiden voyage. Same goes to the last paragraph, maiden voyage. Okay, so the next question is question 7. Okay, for question 7 to question 11, you have to read text B in the insert. Okay, so look at the first paragraph. Give one relative pronoun. Okay, so what is relative pronoun? Relative pronoun is a word that introduces a relative clause. So a part of a sentence that gives more information about a noun. Okay, so these are some examples of common relative pronouns. So we have who, whose, whom, and which. Okay, so let us take a look at the first paragraph here. The relative pronouns that can be found here include who and whose. So of course, you just have to write one since they only mention one. So you can write who or whose. Okay, so the next question, why was the writer impressed by Paul? Coming back to here, okay, so you can see this sentence here. My visit started with Paul, who is one of the most well-informed guides I've ever met. So here you can tell that the writer is very impressed with Paul because he's a very well-informed guide. Question 8, look at the second paragraph. Which literary technique is used in this paragraph? So take one box. I'm going to explain to you what all this means. So the first one is onomatopoeia. It is a word, sounds like the noise it makes. So for example, buzz, it is the sound of a bee. Boom, it is the sound of explosion. So personification is when you give human qualities to non-human things. For example, the wind whispered through the trees. Okay, so what about rhyme? Okay, rhyme is very common in poems and also songs. Okay, so for example, like twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. So the star and the R, it rhymes. Okay, so this actually adds musicality and makes the lines easier to remember. The last one is simile. Okay, so simile compares two things using as or like. Okay, so simile is actually very easy to identify because when you see sentences that use as or like, that is definitely simile. So like for example, she is as busy as a bee. So that is simile. Okay, he ran like a wind. Okay, that is simile. So let us look at the second paragraph to see which technique is being used. Okay, so you can take a look at this sentence here. It seems only right that Belfast gets to tell its part in the ship's story. So what is Belfast? Belfast is actually known as the Titanic Quarter, and it is also a city. So from here you can tell that this is actually personification because this city is given humans' ability to tell its part, which means to tell the ship's story, which only humans can do. So this is personification. So the next question here is give a synonym for a very sad event. So from here you can tell that the synonym is tragedy. Okay, so question 9, look at the third paragraph. How can visitors change some of the displays? So the displays here that they are referring to is interactive screens. So of course visitors can change the displays by swiping or pressing buttons. So you can actually imagine these displays or interactive screens as those that you see on kiosks. Like, you know, when you order McDonald's, you have a kiosk and you have to click the buttons and you can actually swipe. Yeah, so that's the way how visitors can change the displays. Okay, now look at the fourth paragraph. Look at the second sentence. Give the subordinate clause. What is subordinate clause? Subordinate clause is part of the sentence. It does not give full picture by itself. The subordinate clause that we can actually find here in the second sentence of the fourth paragraph is giving great value for money, because it is actually part of the sentence and it does not give the full picture of the entire sentence that what it's actually talking about. How does the writer persuade the reader that they should visit the Titanic Quarter? Give one idea. So based on the final paragraph, you can tell that there are many ideas that you can actually write, but you just have to write one. Okay, so one of them is the Titanic Quarters definitely worth a visit. Okay, you can even write the tours are sensibly priced, or it gives great value for money. And there's one last point is the restaurant serves good quality food. Okay, but of course you just have to write one. Sensibly priced. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so the final question here is match each idea with the correct paragraph of the text. So one example has been done for you, okay, whereby the idea linking the city to the Titanic can be linked to paragraph 2. Okay, so what about getting refreshments? Okay, so what are refreshments? So refreshments actually mean light snacks or drinks. And take a look at paragraph 4. They mention make sure you pop into the restaurant for a bite to eat before you leave. So this paragraph 4 is linked to getting refreshments. Okay, so the next idea is admiring the appearance of museum. Admiring is about liking something, like how it actually looks. So this idea can actually be linked back to paragraph 1 when they mention about, first of all, he walked our group all around the outside of the beautiful building the Titanic Museum is set in, and explain its architecture and link to the Titanic. So here you can tell that they mentioned beautiful and they mentioned museum and they explain its architecture. Of course, they are admiring the beauty of the Titanic Museum. So the idea has to link back to paragraph 1. The final idea here, discovering how the passengers eat. So how do they actually eat? Okay, so this one has to link back to paragraph 3, whereby they mention about the range of tablewares. So here you can see that among the items on display is the range of tableware that each class of passenger on the ship use. So range of tableware, okay, what do we mean by range here is actually different or various. Okay, tableware is like fork, chopsticks, spoons and all. So this actually tells us how passengers eat. Okay, so this has been discovered how they ate their food. Okay, so the last idea has to link back to paragraph 3. Okay, so that's all for today's class. I hope you guys enjoyed my lesson. So if you guys have any questions, anything at all, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. And if you hope to see more videos like this, please like and subscribe. Okay, see ya, bye bye. I'll see you guys soon.